I'm Alfonso Mendoza, host of the My Ed Tech Life podcast, a part of the Education Podcast Network. Shows on the network are individually owned and opinions expressed may not reflect others. Find other interesting education podcasts at edupodcastnetwork.com.
It's the High Tech Podcast. This is myself, Josh, one of the co-hosts, or host, or whatever we call it, as we debate every episode, almost all the time, joined by William Illingworth, my co-host, your host, his wife's husband.
Wow.
I don't know. I'm coming out with definitions.
His nephew's uncle.
Yes. Nailed it.
Yeah. I am who I am. No, I love how you open this up. Like that's your moment. You're like, I'm gonna have a debate with myself now.
Yes. I never agree with myself. If we've got any theme as an intro for the High Tech Podcast, it's basically just us disagreeing with ourselves, about how we're going to do it.
It's true.
Like 600 episodes from now, we will finally have figured it out. But this episode, we still haven't, and I think it's the thing that gives us charm. Other episodes are polished. They feel like they have money behind them and like they're successful. I prefer to feel like a guerrilla warfare style podcast, like where we've got no budget, very little hope, but a whole lot of spunk. That's the High Tech Podcast for you.
Oh God,
I don't know.
Oh,
We're in a weird place, folks. It's a busy time in Will and I's life right now. So you might get some interesting vibes from us over the next several episodes. Who knows? You're gonna have some fun things. But today is an important day. You know why? Because it is the finale of our Ted Lasso Goes to College series.
I was seriously trying to think through what the heck the tune is to the graduation march, and the only thing that could come to my head was the Imperial March, and I just I couldn't.
It's kind of the same thing, It's the same vibe.
No.
Nope, that's the Imperial March.
It's
like that moment.
Ted Lasso Goes to College.
It's Ted Lasso Goes to College. We'll edit that in. Post Will. Drop it in. Sorry, some podcasts talk to an editor.
Right here.
I feel like I want to start doing that now.
Producer, could you take care of that, please?
Yeah, later Will. Edit that in.
I got you,
Not
Josh.
current Will. Yeah, okay. We're at the end of the Ted Lasso Goes to College series. We hope you've been having fun. You'll hear our joke in our recording with our guest, who I've not announced yet. That we're kind of recording out of order. I know it comes as a surprise to you because that never happens in our podcast, but we're doing that right now, and so Will and I are a little discombobulated, if you will, about
as good designers. We're practicing backwards design, right? So we started with the end in mind this episode, and now we'll go back and do episodes 1 through 4.
We're doing it right. Everybody else is doing it wrong. Anyway, for this last series episode, we're gonna be focusing on Ted Lasso. So we decided to bring in Ted himself. I'm just joking. That would be amazing, but that'd be crazy. No, Charles Illingworth. That name sounds familiar. That's because he's been on the podcast before, and also because that's Will's last name. This is Will's brother. He has joined us before on the podcast for an epised number that I definitely have pre-prepared
somewhere
in this
in the 90s.
Introduction.
I think 96.
Yeah, it was somewhere in the 90s. You want to talk a little bit about your brother and how great he is?
Brother is 8 years my senior, but has often been there was times in our lives where the 8 years mattered, but I think we're definitely at a significant season where it's like we were a year or two apart. It's kind of cool. Well, you got that number now. Okay.
Yeah,
now that
it was actually 90. It was episode 90.
Episode 90. Dr. Charles Illingworth joined us about acupuncture and education.
Yeah, on teaching acupuncture online. This time he's joined us to talk about Ted Lasso, because why not? So for this last episode, we're going to be focusing in on Ted Lasso, the man himself. And so Dr. Charles Illingworth is going to help us do that. Just like his brother, you'll find he likes the Ted Lasso show. And so this should be a good time. We've got the experts on call, the Illingworth brothers, plus Josh, who also watches Ted Lasso, but I don't put myself in the same category. So we're going together with enough of that. Let's hear more from Dr. Charles Illingworth as we talk about Ted Lasso and what that teaches us about teaching.
Folks, we're excited for this episode, this concluding episode of the Ted Lasso series for the High Tech Podcast. Specifically to have a guest tonight. You'll see him on screen, but he's actually over my brother's shoulder. It is Waylon Illingworth in the background. There's the little eyes.
There he is. You see the little head. Yeah.
No, very excited, Charles, to have you back. Dr. Charles Illingworth, my older brother, joining us for the consummate episode. How you doing, brother?
The pleasure is mine. I'm doing all right. Glad to be here.
Yeah, we're gonna make some fun of things. I think this is
exactly.
Ted Lasso.
Ted Lasso goes to college. Is actually the official name. Breaking Fourth Wall listeners. It may sound like Will and I have done the whole episode up to this point because in your experience, that's what happened. But we haven't. We have no idea what you're about to experience for the next several weeks leading up to today. We hope it was great.
This is actually the last episode. We're recording it first.
We're recording it first. Fine. It's not confusing at all. It's totally fine. It's like
the magic of
we're going
production.
Backwards.
Exactly.
It'll be great. Yeah.
Yes. It's we are prequel trilogying after the original trilogy.
We promise, folks, this is going to be better than that.
Yeah,
there's no Jar Jar Binks, no wretched CGI.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if Jar Jar Binks
CGI.
wants to come on the podcast, I'm not going to turn him away. I mean, that's
if Ahmad Best says I'm going to come on your podcast, you don't say no.
Also on the hot podcast, yeah.
Also, Jar Jar Binks was the Phantom Menace. I highly believe in that conspiracy theory. Mm-hmm. But this episode's about Ted Lasso, not Star Wars.
Ted Lasso, right? So as we're kicking off each episode, Charles, we have to ask, right? So the reason this episode, series comes up is because, as you know, your little brother has an obsession. I would say healthy. It's healthy-ish. It's there. It's at least
so in my profession.
Yeah.
Health is a spectrum.
Yeah.
Spectrums have extremes.
Yeah. For instance, like he could be more obsessed with murder. That's worse than being obsessed with
listen, I have met murderinos is the official term for a certain true crime podcast for like murder podcasts.
Okay. I was thinking of serial killers.
No. The one of the fan bases for one of the crime podcasts, they're called Murderinos.
Yeah. Very much. We need something like that. Anyway, the point
just to give us some stats though, right? On measurement, the entire Ted Lasso series has a runtime of 12 hours and 28 minutes. So I've sunk many sessions of those 12 hours and 28 minutes into my life. That's a lot of healthy expression.
I think it's fine. It's healthy. But okay, so Will is kind of fanatically obsessed. Okay, we'll go that way. I think I'm okay to say that he's got Catholic candles of characters on his table. I fed that. It's fine. So fanatically, okay. So on a scale,
I'm going to get some of those myself. So
yeah. So scale of 1 to 10, right? 10 being like slightly under Will, because I would put Will at like 11 or 12. And 1 being like a heartless monster who hates Ted Lasso. Where are you at on that scale?
I would probably have to put myself at about a 10.5.
Okay.
I only because I don't have any of the prayer candles.
Yep. Once you get them,
once you get them,
yeah.
Just yet.
Yeah.
I gotta say, you probably need a few more watch throughs to you just finished season 3.
I did just finish season 3. I had recognized that I hadn't watched season 3 yet. Goodness, 2 weeks ago, but then I shotgunned the entire season in 2 days.
As you should. Yes.
Let's make up for it. I mean, I'm just saying that Will had already seen the first episode of season 3 before our watch party of the first episode of season 3. So that might be a thing to strive for.
Are you a little bitter about that, Josh?
No. I'm more impressed that he didn't tell us the entire time.
Fair.
I'm actually not really bitter, as more of just I think it's hilarious that we watched the episode and he waited until it was over to tell us that he had seen it already. Well
done, brother.
It was hilarious. It was good. I had no inkling. There's a little part of me that thought that was probably what probably happened, but it's fine.
One does what one must. So I'm not as fanatical about Ted Lasso as I am about other things. For example, the movie The Princess Bride. I will search out behind the scenes stories about The Princess Bride, and I'm not at that point with Ted Lasso yet, but I think that it is one of the more well-produced, well-acted, well-written series that has come out within the past 10 years.
Yeah, it changed TV for me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
There's a lot like with the Marvel surplus and just like the approach to streaming and stuff, like we've gotten so much TV and you can binge How I Met Your Mother, The Office, some of these long form comedy shows, but they still can't hit like Ted Lasso did. And I think those of us who got it when it came out the first time, season 1 in COVID, deep dark gray time, and it was like a very bright ball of happiness. So,
most of the time.
Kind of, yeah.
I think that is one of the things that makes the series what it is that it's not afraid to tackle some very difficult things. It's not afraid to talk about the everyday darkness of mental health and anxiety and depressive issues, and also not afraid to tackle issues of sexuality and gender, issues of preference, of death and divorce, right? They didn't really pull any punches in that regard.
No. Yeah. And where I always come back and, like, for me, I've told a bunch of people, oh my gosh, this show is so wholesome. It is so joyful. It is so uplifting. And then I've had a few people watch it like, dude, they cuss like every other. I'm like, no, my bad.
Didn't you tell somebody that? And they were like, I watched it with my kids. And they were like, that was not wholesome.
Yeah.
We were like, oh, we've done a different type of wholesome. Like,
wholesome as in holistically wholesome.
Yeah, like right. That's on you for not getting our word. Really, I think.
Yeah. Lost in translation, as it were.
Semantics.
But one of the reasons we bring up Ted Lasso on the podcast, right, is, as we've already talked about in the series that we clearly know about because Will and I have experienced it. We're bringing it in because one of the things I also find interesting about Ted Lasso is, well, it's not about education, right? It's about like life transformation. I would push to that to a certain extent, right? There's this kind of arc, especially for Ted and a few of the other characters, that like they start one way, whether it's the team, the people, Ted, and they make it to a journey and somewhere else by season 3, right? And some of that I find interesting is how Ted as a character interacts with the people around him, and really, the show obviously putting Ted in the center and absolutely focusing on his journey and where he goes, is also focusing on how Ted kind of transforms this, ridiculous soccer club, and kind of like comes in, and instead of like in the classic like other sports movies or TV shows being very focused on like the victory type of motif, is really more coming in and changing the people, right? And in education, at the end of the day, no matter what we're trying to do, whatever topic we're trying to teach, we've argued from the podcast before, and I know, Charles, last time you were on, we talked about this a bit, is it's like education in its sense should be about person transformation. It's not just about learning things. It's about taking somebody from somewhere to a different place. across that, and that looks like
Yeah.
different spectrums, whether it's a full educational journey or we're talking about a course where you're saying this is where my students are now, this is where I want them to be at
Mhm.
the end. So I think there's some interesting dynamics from Ted to learn about. So this is all kind of background to say, like, I think the question we're really trying to answer for our listeners here in this is, from our perspective, what makes Ted this great teacher? Like, what made Ted a teacher in this dynamic that transformed some of the characters that we see, right? Like, Roy is different because of Ted and his involvement. We see Nate being different in he has a crazy journey too, but like the way Ted involves Beard comes right. It seems like everybody Ted touches and talks to in some way, he changes them, and they seem to learn something, whether Ted means them to or not, but they learn something from him.
So I think the key to how Ted worked in the series of Ted Lasso is vis-a-vis the idea of authenticity, which is part and parcel to Ted's journey in and of itself through the 3 seasons.
Right.
There was a big point where you find out that the reason that he's like the way he is, and I won't spoil anything, folks, for any of you who haven't watched the series yet.
Yeah. If they haven't, they probably shouldn't be watching this. Go watch it, people.
Right.
We're going to spoil a lot.
I think that, and I really think that this came in through the crux of season 2, where he was really struggling with why he was the way he was.
Yeah.
Right? Because you can be incredibly authentic, but for inauthentic reasons. And people pick up on that. They feel the truth in what you have to say, but then they recognize that there's something behind that isn't quite right. And I think that was the crux of Ted's journey in the 2nd season. Right?
Well,
in the 1st season, we spend that time figuring out, here's this guy from Middle America coming to England.
Part of the joke.
Part of the joke, literally the proverbial fish out of water, to coach a sport that he has. And one of the best jokes in season 3 to me was the fact that he just opened a book about soccer strategy. In the 3rd season.
Are you reading that?
Like, it was like just before the championship, which goes to show you that it wasn't about the sport for Ted. It was about getting anybody he interacted with to be their authentic selves, to live their truth.
And like, to Josh's word of transformative, you're hosting. Wow. Try again. 3rd time. Focusing in on the idea of authenticity. When we look at education, when we look at sports, we think of grades and we think of victory. And that's not where he started. And he comes to Rebecca at a point of a significant loss and says, go ahead, fire me, I get it. And she's going through her transformative arc and goes, no, we got to keep up. You've got to go forwards, right? So she's already actually taken him in, part and parcel, and is like on his mission, doesn't know that she's in, and brings him around. She gives him a moment of transparency, authenticity, like, no, a loss isn't it, Ted Lasso. We can do better. You've already proven how much better we can do. So I think that there's those moments of, like, very early on season 1, recognizing where his method is already working, but he still needs a piece of his own medicine. Yeah.
And from, like, oh goodness, you gentlemen are having me access information from 2007, 2008.
You want me to start the hand crank for you?
We get those were the best years, really.
So my first secondary level degree was in theater, and so there are theories to the nature of what is called the hero's journey. And the journey that Ted Lasso is going on is the hero's journey.
Yep.
In fact, the journey that everyone goes on in that series is the hero's journey, right? And so there are two really pivotal moments that happen in the hero's journey. And the first of which is known as the moment of anagnoresis, which is the moment of removal of ignorance.
Ooh.
And then there is usually a moment that is referred to as peripetia, which is a reversal of fortunes or reversal of perspective. And you usually can't have peripetia without anagnoresis. If someone is still ignorant of what is going on, there cannot be a reversal of fortune. And you see that happening with every character at almost at least once a season, at least almost once an episode, in one way or another.
There are some people who complain about the ending, the conclusion to the saga, to episodes, seasons 1, 2, and 3. And some people complain about how things tighten up or how quickly someone turns around, right? Just immediately preceding this episode should be the Nate episode. That's a big one for a lot of folks. Nate becomes a villain in his arc and is redeemed, but we don't necessarily see his redemption. And I think that that's one of those moments of like, this is the show about Ted Lasso. We don't need to see every piece of everything. We barely see the football games themselves, right? We see like some critical shots, some critical goals, but the stuff we do see that we are witness to is the transformative experiences. For Nate, we have hopefully probably already talked about this, right? But like him making that effort to meet Jade is a transformative experience that results in his redemption. Ted takes in season 1 this step of going to London. We don't know why he's, we don't see the cause to him getting to this point of going to London, but that's the huge transformative effect. Season 2, we have him interacting with Dr. Sharon, Dr. Fieldstone, the sports psychologist. And so that's this huge thing that he's trying to deal with. And there's so many peppered and salted pieces of what that means, and bigger arcs or little arcs. But then in the 3rd season, it's this, do I or don't I return? Do I stay or do I go? And you can't, I just stuck.
I know.
I think that those arcs, are evidences of what you're saying, like season by season, but also like accumulatively across the entire series.
Well, that's also, and this is one of the reasons that I believe that Ted Lasso was written so well, is that is the universality of any decision-making process. If you know something is wrong and you are given the tools to fix it, then you understand that there are only a limited number of decisions that you can make thereafter, and that you are responsible for all of them.
Yeah.
And so you saw a man in season 1, and you learned about who he was. Ted, Middle America, Midwestern guy, football coach, being brought in to purportedly tank a team as a divorce revenge pact, right?
Oh.
Right? So this then sets up the scaffold, the foundation for what happens in season 2 and season 3. And I think that Ted's moment, I mean, there is rarely one moment because life isn't that clean.
Right.
But his first moment of anagnoresis is acceptance of the fact that he has an issue in season 2. And is acceptance of the fact that this is a long-standing issue, and this has been sort of the reason why he has behaved in certain ways for most of his life, or at least since he was 16.
Right.
We're
given that time frame across his life of what these instigators are. Yeah.
And so he goes through that journey, has all of these instances where he is removed of his own ignorance of his self, capital SELF, right? So that he can now, in knowing, become responsible for the decisions that he wants to make surrounding those issues,
Right.
which then empowers him to make the decision in season 3 to go be with his son.
Right. Right. We
Yeah.
see all of this character development, all of this character motivation, as the stuff that's starting to define Ted, like you just said, capital S self, you know. But that's what pushes him to be this best coach he can be, and where he's, you know, like even some of the issues that spawn from his father and his emotional issues and attachment issues. He must do, like you're just saying, he must do the best. He knows he can accomplish the best, which is to transform lives, and he can't stop himself from doing it. He's compelled.
So I'm going to say something that may be borderline controversial.
Uh-oh.
Ted's not a good coach.
Oh, right.
Okay.
He is a good leader.
Give us this. Okay.
No, I respect it, right?
Beard is a much better coach than Ted is.
Yep. And he knows it and does that. You know, he pairs himself with the people he needs.
But Ted is a better leader than Beard at first.
Right.
But it is Ted's example as a leader that then brings the coaching staff together for Richmond.
Right.
So that when he leaves to pursue what is arguably the most beneficial thing for him, Richmond can continue on with their championship status and can continue to develop the team. With success. But that could only have happened with Ted being a leader.
Right.
And moreover, being authentic as a human being within that role.
Yeah. That's true. Yeah, absolutely. And that gets to something I think I would point to as kind of another thing with him that, from my standpoint, what kind of puts him in the situation where we see him changing and teaching and transforming people in this show as a character is that I want to go back to season 1, right? There's this interesting thing that Ted does when he comes in that I have always found intriguing, which is like his focus on basically 2 things, right? Authentically, like knowing people, and the focus on the culture of that team, right? So like it's not even a focus on the skills or the right players or, you know, whatever it may be. It's a focus on, these are who we have here right now. How can I basically, you see it kind of inadvertently where he's kind of trying to build this culture at the team where they are encouraged to speak up. They're encouraged to engage with each other. There's this camaraderie built, right? And it allows him to do other things throughout the rest of the season as they get closer and closer, to be able to leverage those connections and that relationship and culture to do things, make changes, and things like that, to the point that you see in season 3, they're doing it for each other. Like Ted's kind of not really doing much, right? Like to the, you know, pivotal moment, right, where they bring out the sign that got ripped up, you know, and their brain, they were holding on to pieces that whole time, right? Season 1, he's the one carrying that torch, right? Of trying to get them to do that.
Yeah.
Season 3, he's, you know, not carrying the torch, but just kind of like accepting where we're at, kind of moving the team, and they're all the ones that are kind of like bringing it back in to the team, like that culture,
carrying the mantle
that moves on its own.
To use the analogy of carrying the torch, Ted comes in carrying the torch, and then in the second season he shows others how to light their own, and then in the third he then passes the torch, quite literally. And so go ahead.
I see a very concentric approach to it too. Like in season 1, he's as explicit as asking Keely, how do I reach Jamie? Now, we don't need to go into her response, but you know, he's tactically trying to find these people out and figure them out. He needs to get
Mhm.
everyone in the room. He's trying to understand Higgins. He takes him out for lunch. See you later. He's trying to just like build relationships. But Josh is like making it all the more clear for me here what you were just saying. In season 3, he does so little with the actual team by season 3. His big focus in season 3 is himself, ironically, not ironically, intentionally, and the coaches, Nate, Beard, and Roy.
Yeah.
Like they are actually probably the most that he interacts with directly, besides his own family members or his own journey. Because seasons 1, 2, and 3 do start and end focusing on a character. Season 1 is Rebecca, season 2 is Nate, season 3 is Ted. It opens and closes on that character in each of the 3 seasons.
Yeah.
So that tells us something about what they're actually trying to do and accomplish. And in season 3, he can only ignore the team. I don't put it that way. Like, I don't mean it that way, but like he can only not be spending the time with the team because he did that so much. He built that foundation in season 1. And I'll take like a hard stamped here to say, like, for education, there's a classroom etiquette, a classroom culture lesson there. Like so many teachers will just ignore the personality of the classroom.
Oh, yeah, 100%.
You've got 20, 30 people there in the room, and they're humans, and they're bringing so much to it. And teachers very often do not engage it, whereas it's the first thing Ted does.
Well, and we know... Go ahead, Charles.
Go for it, Josh.
Okay, I was just going to say that we know that like from a group standpoint, that when you have a group that's cohesive and works well together and you can get that going, they encourage each other across a learning journey and to change, right? At the end of the day, that's actually even more effective than a teacher, like, because that teacher can only reach so many of the students. But when you have a room of students who are coming alongside under the same banner and mission that you can leverage that to have them help teach each other, right? I mean, this is some of what we get from like kind of collaborative and constructive models in education, of kind of bringing everybody's experiences to the table and having them teach each other. It's not this hopeful, la 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 wonderful dream that we have for things. It's that we know that people and groups together can accomplish so much more, even in learning, than just one person telling a bunch of people a whole bunch of things and being really great with a couple of the people in the classroom.
Yeah, so we've been actively skirting around this idea for the past 20 minutes. And I think that the key to Ted Lasso's approach, and the key to what you're talking about, Josh, and the key in my own experience, is community.
Yeah.
Right? Because community breeds culture. If you want to change culture, change the community.
Right.
And Ted, to what you said, William, when he got there, when he got to Richmond, the first thing he did was figure out who everyone was.
And was the shower pressure too bad or not?
Right?
He did everything he could to learn the culture of the community.
Yeah.
And moreover, to help bring the community together, which is why I say he's not a coach, he's a leader, because that's the job of a leader, which is the job of a teacher. As a teacher, your job is to develop and maintain the community of your classroom.
Yeah.
Because the community of your classroom breeds the culture. And to what you said, Josh, it breeds cross learning.
Yeah.
Everyone. So I teach. We spoke about this last time I was on, but I teach at the graduate level, and I teach master's students and doctor's students. And they are all so intelligent, but in so many different ways.
Yeah.
And they bring their life experience in so many different ways into the classroom that it gets to the point that I cannot teach to every single one of them at the same time.
Right.
I can't. But what I can do is I can develop the culture, develop the community of the classroom, and push, as Ted did, in different ways into interacting with individuals who have individual strengths and individual weaknesses, and encourage cross communication within that structure so that people can hear me, and each one of the people in the room can hear the one thing that I might have said, but there will be 17 different versions of it, and then they can cross pollinate.
An example of how he practically does that, and I think there's a metaphor in this for teaching and learning. Season 1, he hands out a book to every person in the room. So that's I chose an activity to give everyone, but each book was intentionally designed to the person that he gave it to. He did not give out the same book to 25, 30, whatever guys. Like he handpicked it, and we get such beautiful reactions to that, as Roy Kent, what? No. Eventually reading it, sobbing, realizing he's the girl that should be the leader, and coming around by season 3 to being Ted Lasso's mini-me. And you have Jamie Tart, who throws the book out, and by season 3 is seen reading books on his own. Right? There's just like, both were received differently, both were immediately handled differently, and then both have still this butterfly effect on a positivity. Like, there are times for the teacher to do the same thing for everybody, but it's up to that teacher doing it expertly, taking the time to think it through intentionally, reach the student that's there. It may not go the same way, but it's going to have that impact if you have the right approach, if you have that authentic Ted Lassoism.
You absolutely cannot approach every individual in a classroom setting the same way. You can't, especially when you're doing something that's hands-on versus didactic. It's a little different, right? Because if you're talking about something theoretical, you can talk to several hundred people at the same time about the same thing, and everybody takes their notes, and whoever doesn't understand it can email the teacher.
Sure.
But for example, in my experience with what I do, I teach a lot of clinical hands-on courses. And so I can't just say, oh, it's right here to each one of my students. But what I can do is say, okay, I have found this thing. It's right here. Put your hand where my hand is. And now do this thing with it. What do you feel? And then I can interact with each of them on that level, that way. And there are students that are more inclined toward theory. There are students that are more inclined toward practical, the praxis of the medicine. So, okay, well, for you, these resources would be better. For you, these resources would be better.
This side of Charles's books on his desk. This side of Charles's books on his desk.
Unfortunately, I don't have
that
a division like that.
Yeah.
Not on my desk. On my bookshelf, yes. On my desk, no.
They're just books.
They're just
there is no single book that is just a book.
Thank you. Say that. Here's what I want to tee up, because I think we're pointing out a bunch of positives. I mean, anybody who's seen the show knows that Ted goes through negatives or some low points. I think they do a good job of humanizing him too. He's not perfect. He's not just the ultimate hero. But something that happens, I think it's season 1, Ted and Beard are at the bar having a drink, and Ted says, well, it's not about winning. And Beard slams the table and says, it is. It is about winning. This is these kids' lives. This is their livelihoods. They are committed to this. And Ted, as being so people first, person first as he is, misses a mark of like, but these people are here for a purpose. Like, I think that's a measure for us, a balance for us. In the classroom, we don't want to just have a great time, just spend time in the culture. We have the expertise.
You're there for a reason.
Yeah, you have a reason. That's a good point to bring it back to, right? And that's a good way to break down that moment, which is that, like, at the end of the day, Ted is people first, which is good. And there's an element of that where his focus is in the right place, but he is there for a purpose.
This brief Ted Lasso break brought to you by Waylon Illingworth, one loud and sassy Catahoulin
Yeah.
who
Not
is
a
joining the
sponsor.
podcast.
Hashtag not a sponsor.
Not hashtag not a sponsor. Welcome back, Waylon and Charles, to the High Tech.
Thank you. I hope my mic was muted. I had
was.
muted it.
We did like a little infomercial for Waylon's
Yeah, we were
sake.
doing like a
yeah.
bacon
Thank you.
commercial for you while you were gone.
I'm not going to cut that. That's going to stay.
Professor Whalen. He is my assistant teacher.
Yeah.
Some days.
Yeah.
Where were we? Oh yes, purpose to teaching and
Is
education.
there for a purpose, right? Like, is that in education it's a similar way. Like, there are the teachers who go too overboard, where at the point where like their entire focus is just the people and the culture, which is great, but then they forget that they're actually supposed to be teaching something, right? Like the students come there for a reason, especially in a lot of our two situations where we're in not like K-12 experiences, but we have people like literally paying to be at our classes in our situations, right? I know what happens in K-12. There's private schools, taxes pay for school. I get all of that. Okay, so if anyone's gonna get annoyed at me, I know that. What I'm talking about though is more specifically like with college, higher ed, graduate, like there's people paying to be there, right? And so like at the end of the day, we also do need to weigh those pieces, right? And I would say that's maybe something that changes about him moving into the later seasons, that like he paid off some of that work of building the culture and then does kind of refocus on winning, right? Like he kind of then, it's your joke, he finally opens a book about soccer, where like he's like, maybe I should actually care about winning, about this. And so I think from a teaching perspective, I think what is helpful to emphasize that is that we should always be caring for the culture and looking at things, but especially the beginning of the class, right? Like I don't want to oversimplify this to just look at the seasons and look how long it took them to get there and these types of things, but I do think there's something to this, that like when we start a class, like, and we're getting into the rhythm, especially in the beginning, whatever that looks like, whether it's your first couple weeks or whatever it is, the standard in college or any kind of situation, right, is to just like read a syllabus, make sure everybody understands what they have to do, that they'll get these punishments,
maybe do a name game
stuff. Yeah, maybe do a name game. Like, what if we were more careful to say, you know, those first couple weeks, I'm really going to focus on what is the culture of my classroom and what rhythms need to exist for that to effectively happen, right? Like, how do I need to do this to build a culture that I can leverage as we're moving forward?
And I think what is important about that, and we can see, I'm going to tie it together here. We can see that Ted did this in season 1. He learned what the culture was before he espoused a new one. Yeah. And so there are a lot of movements, you know, anti-grading kind of things, which I think have a lot of value. And I think that we do need to take a critical look at the culture of education. And I think that it needs to be understood in ways other than it has been understood heretofore. And I think that we need to not blindly reproduce it.
Yep.
Because, and here's an Einstein quote, at least it's attributed to Einstein. And William, I know that you've heard this multiple times in the house growing up. The definition of insanity is continuing to do the same thing over, expecting different results.
Yeah.
So we understand that there are a lot of things going on in the current culture that are problematic and as such need to be looked at and understood. And one of the prime ways to do that is to start in the educational atmosphere, which is why I think a lot of education has changed over the past 15 years.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, not being mean about this. I am being intentional with this question. Mm-hmm. Your educational experience, you're my older brother, was different from mine. We both had non-traditional learning experiences, but do you remember in elementary school the word individualization being used?
No.
Was there such a thing as an IEP?
No. So there was, but
Okay.
it was only for gifted students or students that had developmental issues.
Right. And that it still is in that sense, like of what I know of K-12, but the door, the gateway to get into that status is very wide. And I don't think that's a problem in and of itself, but what it means to the classroom is a lot of challenges, frankly, because
Yeah.
every student has an individualized education plan.
Mm-hmm.
Well, how do you reach every student, with these kinds of
Well,
things?
what that should make us look at. Hi, buddy. Yes. Here's
There we
Professor
go.
Whalen. There he is.
On screen. Welcome, buddy. Did he sign a release for this episode? Is he going to be?
Get down. Thank you. That's okay.
I want to
He'll get paid an extra
I'll
kibble.
put him on the website.
I can get you one. I have a photo of him wearing one of my scarves, and it's one of the cutest things ever.
Yes.
So
Yes.
I think that what the whole to the crux of what you're talking about there with the generation of a larger series of individualized education programs. First off, if we actually focused more on education and funds allotted to same, I think it wouldn't be as much of an issue, but we won't get political beyond that.
It's its own. Yep.
And if we look at the nature of the individualized educational plans, I guarantee you we would start to see trends. And if you start to see trends, then you can start to say, hey, maybe we should group these students together because they learn similarly.
Right. We
And
could make a
then-
positive out of this.
And then teach them the way they learn.
Yeah.
Which, to bring it back to Ted Lasso, Jamie Tart wasn't going to learn the same way that Roy Kent was going to learn. Wasn't going to learn the same way that Obisanya was going to learn.
Yep.
And so on and so forth.
Yeah.
And there's evidence across all 3 seasons of these using radically different teaching tools to reach the team and reach each other. It's a beautiful thing.
So there is this Taoist idea of non-doing, which is a really weird idea. But the crux behind the idea of non-doing is doing without conceiving of doing. So Ted Lasso taught everyone that he came into contact with without teaching a single one of them.
Sure. That makes sense.
He Jedi mind tricked every last one of them. Bringing back the Star Wars for you, Josh.
I love it.
So teaching by Jedi mind trick is not something that can be learned easily.
Right.
Because a lot of the modern primary education is about reproducing rather than understanding.
Yes. Yeah.
Which sets the foundation for secondary and then higher education, graduate education, for further reproduction of information rather than understanding how to truly manipulate the information.
And I think that actually comes from, you can see that in his attitude and his character, but it comes from season 1, episode 8, the dart scene. Be curious, not judgmental. I actually tried looking that up. He quotes, is it Walt Whitman? And it's one of those potentially accredited to Walt Whitman's, but you can't prove it is or isn't. But the be curious, not judgmental approach is an attitudinal. It is a mindset thing that I think results in what you're talking to. But he punctuates that whole scene with the one dart in the thing, barbecue sauce. White knights it, takes care of Rebecca, puts Rupert in place. He shows a lot of personality in that. I think it's just a beautiful thing. So this has been a whole conversation just to tear apart his personality. But I think that is season 1, episode 8. You know what I mean? It's early on. It's showing a lot of who Ted is and why he cares about what he's trying to do.
And there is gravitas to the way he goes about it.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Right. It's not just that he's white knighting for Rebecca.
Right.
In that moment, he's also proving it to himself.
Yeah.
Because he watched his dad die. He watched all the things that happened with his mother, and all of that. And all of those things led him to where he is that day. And so that moment where he can be truly curious and he can prove it to somebody who doesn't care a single pence.
Yep.
And he can say, well, if you're going to assume that of me, I'll play you for a fool.
Yep. Beautiful spot.
Yeah.
All right. Well, do we have any final? This is great. We didn't even try, and we just 45 minutes of Ted Lasso. I can't wait to do
I'll
all the
talk
other
to you
episodes
guys
we have.
about
I didn't think it was going to be hard to get you two talking about Ted Lasso for 45 minutes. I could get Will just talking in a room by himself about Ted Lasso for 45 minutes. It'll just be like Will there talking to no one.
This is the look of lack of surprise.
Yeah. No, I think bringing it back and just bringing it back together as we're kind of closing out. I think really there's a lot, and we're having fun talking about Ted Lasso. There's a lot of things that come out of it, but if we're looking at it from a teaching perspective and kind of, I think what we're hearing is kind of this intentionality, this authentic intentionality as you're kind of coming in, right? And those are buzzwords that we use in an overviewing statement, but I think really it's kind of this idea that he wanted to get to know the people, the area he was in, and from there built a culture that helped him kind of reach the entire group in a different way, right? Whether it's from his interactions with them or their interactions with each other, end up transforming that area. So I think a lot of this is looking at ourselves as teachers, being strategic about kind of coming in and looking at that, trying to understand the classrooms that we're in, focusing not just on the content, but on the people and the culture, and being able to leverage that to teach well, I think is things that we can kind of take away as we're looking at how teaching and learning can work. And how we maybe can see some of that for sure.
Absolutely. Authenticity, community, culture. I think with those three things, you can develop an atmosphere educationally to teach anything.
Yeah.
Anything.
Yep.
So.
Thank you, brother, for joining us.
My
this
pleasure.
Has been the conclusion of our Ted Lasso series on, specifically this time, Ted Lasso as he goes to college. I think I'll just sign this interview off with a good old barbecue sauce.
Barbecue sauce.
All right. Thank you again, brother, for joining us. I hope you're still listening. Really appreciate you taking the time with us and digging into Ted. Josh, this is not only the conclusion of the series, I believe, if I've counted right, this is the end of season 5. We are culminating a lot with this episode.
There's a lot. There's a lot going on.
Talking.
Yeah, there's definitely a lot going on.
But like, I think it's really cool. You know, in many ways, I think that, and Dr. Justin Harbin, a good friend of the podcast, has often talked about and said to me, like, metaphor is one of his big instructional tools. I believe that too. I really love the idea of metaphor as an instructional tool, that setting up an image for someone, a connection to another thing, will help them understand different ideas. That, I hope, is what this series has done for you, what we've done in this season even, making connections with unlike things. I would not have imagined Ted Lasso would be a focus point for the High Tech Podcast when we started episode 1 in 2021, right? That wasn't even a hope and a dream.
Was Ted Lasso out
at
that point?
Yeah, dropped in 2020.
2020? Okay.
Pretty sure.
Yeah, that's just it doesn't really matter. We haven't timed our lives by the podcast.
Well,
Ted Lasso
I like facts.
Now I'm super curious.
Facts are really important to me.
But yeah, to your point, I hope you guys have found this useful. One, just to have fun talking about Ted Lasso. I think it's been a good time for us to talk about change it up a bit, to talk about some different stuff on the podcast and change up the way we handle it. But at the end of the day, I think what's so interesting about the Ted Lasso story and the show is there's a lot of stuff that goes on in it, but there is really what we want. I think we got to this with your brother here on this episode, is that like what we want to happen in education is transformation of people. Now we have targets,
Yes.
we have goals, we want them to learn, we have all of that stuff. I'm not saying that that stuff doesn't matter, but at the end of the day, all those goals should be around a student being something different by the end of the class, right? And we see in Ted Lasso an interesting portrayal of a person and dynamics that cause people to transform in very different ways and in different places. And I think we got to today the fact that Ted, while not being the only reason and not being a perfect person in the show at all, he's not, you know, he's got his own issues, he's got his own stuff he's working through.
Right.
But what he does is simply focuses on the culture and the people and authentically connecting with those people and figuring out what's the best thing that that person can get from me, as in this case the leader, the coach, but in this case looking at as a teacher, like we're going to be more effective if we slow down and we take some time to focus in on who are the people that we have in our classroom, who are these students, where are they coming from, what are their lives like, and what's going to help each one of them from me, right? And this doesn't mean that you're killing yourself doing absolutely everything you can, right? And like you're overworking yourself. It means that like finding one thing that each of those people from that, each of the students that you have could benefit from you to learn, right, is something we learn from what Ted does. And then building a culture where students can come along each other and help teach each other builds a classroom that you can kind of foster learning in a different way, in an unexpected way.
And you started to you connected that point to, I think, the idea that like some teachers wrestle with, and I mean all of us probably have wrestled with the fact that we can't reach everybody, or we struggle to reach harder students. For this, like Ted, you know, he's a character. There's writers behind him. It's a perfect world, right? That's fine. But Ted reaches Jamie as well as he does Nate, as well as he does Roy, as well as he does Isaac, the captain of the team after Roy. But he does it always in different ways, right? When he has to reach Isaac, he knows that he's not the person to do it. He goes and gets Roy, and he uses Roy to reach Isaac. Like, we don't have to be everything to every student. And Ted is a good example of how you want to leverage the people, the assets, the heroes in your life to help you reach other heroes. I think that might be my like concluding sentiment. Ted is a hero. We see that in his journey. Charles proved that with us to us tonight with some really interesting Greek language that I'm going to literally have to have him spell because I have no idea what those words are. But if you are trying to find what your story is, how you can be your hero, it's just as important to find the people who are heroes in your life to help you along the way. We don't do this alone. And teaching doesn't itself have to be a solo journey either. You know, a lot of faculty get up in the room to be the person at the front of the room by themselves. It doesn't have to be that way. Bring the other heroes around you into the process, because that's the best. You have the best chance of reaching as many students as possible by bringing the AAA team to the process.
Yeah, absolutely. I don't think I could say it better myself. I think that's good. I think it's a good way to wrap up.
Boom.
This is the end of season 5 of the High Tech Podcast and the series Ted Lasso Goes to College. We will be on a break here for a little bit because by the time you're listening to this, it is like almost Christmas time. So this is
wow.
Yeah, wow, this is crazy.
Folks, it's October. We're recording this in October.
Yeah, exactly. It's a bit crazy. So we're going to be on break here for a little bit back. We will be back in the new year as the High Tech Podcast, because why would we change our name at this point? That's weird. But we'll be jumping back in. Watch, we'll change our name now. Like a month from now, something will happen.
Yeah, right.
No. So we will be back in the new year with more fun, more high-tech hijinks, more craziness, maybe another series on Ted Lasso. Probably not. We'll let that one sit for a while. Maybe. But we'll be back talking about ed tech, education, and all in between. Thank you for joining us for another week as we continue to learn what it looks like to be Ted No, I'm just joking. What it looks like to harness technology in the classroom, whether online or in person or at Richmond. Barbecue sauce.
Barbecue sauce.